Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the next in the series of the OneBasin CRC's webinars. I'm Neville Crossman, I'm the chair for today, but just like to welcome you all to this webinar, which is called Water Futures, Local Communities Leading Change. So I'd like to first begin by acknowledging the country that I'm on today, which is Kaurna country, of the Kaurna Nation. And I pay my respects to the traditional owners of all the nations across the Murray-Darling Basin, of which there are quite a few, of course. And I encourage you in the chat to acknowledge the traditional owners of the location from which you're joining from today in Australia and even overseas, if that's possible. It's really always interesting to see where everyone comes from. So please put that in the chat. So we have here a QR code if you'd like to receive ongoing information and newsletters about the CRC. Please scan this QR code here and you can be added to our mailing list and receive regular updates on what the CRC is up to. So the OneBasin CRC, we've been around now for around 3 years, actually a tad over. We're a 10-year research program focused on water and the Murray-Darling Basin, hence the name OneBasin CRC. We have as our goal is to increase the value of water and ensure the irrigation regions and beyond within the Murray-Darling Basin are the most sustainable, prosperous and resilient in the world. We are divided into 4 key research programs. The Foresight and Decision program, which is very forward-looking and in particular looking at the scenarios of climate change and other big drivers of change and risks. That's led by Professor Ariella Helfgott at the University of Adelaide. We have a second program called Technology and Opportunity that's very much focused on technologies to help agriculture and others more broadly become the most sustainable, resilient and productive in the world. That program is led by Professor Seth Westra, also at University of Adelaide. I'm a program leader of the Adaptation and Innovation program, which is very much focused on how communities and farmers and society more broadly can adapt and innovate to the many changes we face in the basin. And I'm at Flinders University in South Australia. And our fourth program is on First Nations-led research. And that's a relatively new program that is going through a phase at the moment of project development. That's led by Professor Troy Weston, who is based at Charles Sturt University over in the East Coast. We are very strongly regionally distributed. We have 4 hubs across the basin where our projects have a very strong presence, and they're on the map in the screen in front of you. There's the Loxton hub in South Australia, the Mildura hub in northwestern Victoria, the Griffith hub in southern New South Wales, and then the Gundawindi hub up in the far north part of the basin down in the southeast pocket of Queensland. We have 7 university partners as part of the Cooperative Research Centre, and then around 80 non-research partners. So the panellists, there are 4 of us. I'm the chair. As I said, I'm Professor Neville Crossman. I am the program leader in the Adaptation and Innovation program in the CRC. And then we are excited to have some speakers from across one of our projects, which is called Water Futures. We have the project co-lead, Margot Rawsthorne from the University of Sydney, and I'll hand over in a moment to each of these people to introduce themselves. We have Kelsey Burns, a PhD student, also on the project. And then we have a very valuable community member who's deeply involved in the project, Julia Haynes. So, yes, I'll now hand over to each of the panellists to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Neville. Hi, everyone. Great to see such a range of interests through the chat. I'm Margot Rawsthorne. I work at the University of Sydney. I've been teaching community development there for the last couple of decades, and I co-lead this program, the Water Futures project, with Amanda Howard, and we have some industry partners, the Regional Development Association from the Riverlands area and the Murray-Darling Association. So I just want to acknowledge those. Murray-Darling Association, we're at Griffith at the moment at their national conference, so they're rather busy right at the moment. But looking forward to a good session today.
Awesome. Thanks, Margot. I'll just jump in next. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelsey Burns. I'm a PhD candidate at University of Sydney, funded by the OneBasin CRC program. I'm originally from Bathurst in New South Wales, which is on the lands of the Wiradjuri people, currently in Griffith, as Margot said, to attend the Murray-Darling Association conference, which is also on the lands of the Wiradjuri people, but I've moved to Mildura early last year as part of the OneBasin program on the lands of the first people of the Miller O'Malley. So really excited to talk about our Water Futures program today. And with that, I'll pass on to Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie. I'm from Berri, which is on Erewhon country in regional South Australia, a town of around 8,000 people that's on the river. I'm the community steward for a homegrown not-for-profit organisation called Our Town Berri, and I am involved with the Revive and Thrive collective as a community member, very actively interested in having a sustainable and thriving community.
Great. Thanks all. And thank you for the introductions. And I will actually now hand over to Margot, who will kick us off with a couple of presentations.
Okay. Thanks, Kelsey, for that, for the slides. So our plan today is to go from the more big picture to the nitty-gritty. So I'm going to talk a bit about the broad context of what Water Futures is trying to do. Kelsey's then going to give you some more detail about the specific case studies that we're undertaking, and then Julie's going to talk from the perspective of a community member driving the sorts of changes that Water Futures is trying to support. So Water Futures is funded. It's a as I said before, it's a collaborative project between university academics, researchers, community groups, and community organisations like the Murray-Darling Association and the RDA, and increasingly groups like Our Town Berri, and community groups like Cabarita. So you'll hear a bit more about these groups. The aim of Water Futures is to support adaptation, or what we might think of as transformation, transformative change, through simultaneously taking action and doing research. So that's our methodology. It's sometimes people struggle with understanding how what we're doing is research, but what we see in action research is that knowledge gets built in a much more collaborative and nuanced way. So rather than sitting above or outside community processes, action research allows us to walk alongside communities who are acting on their own priorities. That's a really important part of what we're trying to do here. Is we're not going into a community like Mildura or into Berri and saying, well, this is what you need to do. We're walking alongside going, what are you interested in doing? How can we be helpful? How research can be useful to that change process? We've been doing this type of research for the past decade with a group of researchers, a loose kind of collection of researchers using action research, very much focusing on disasters and the impact of disasters on communities. We believe that what we've learnt in those disaster settings are useful for the changes that are facing communities in the Murray-Darling Basin. In some ways, what we're seeing in the Murray-Darling Basin through climate change will be a slow evolving disaster. So we're wanting to put communities at the centre of those responses to those challenges, and to draw on community knowledges and energies to actually drive the changes that might be needed. We have a very strong belief that community-led solutions are inherently more sustainable. And by that, what I'm talking about there is that sustainability is due to not being dependent on external funding or external people or programs, but it's driven by local people. Kelsey, can you flip to the next screen? Thanks. So the sustainability comes from the fact that it is local people driving action rather than external groups driving action and external priorities. What all this means in practice is that we're working in 4 case study areas, communities. We work directly with community members. We work with groups or individuals to plan, act and reflect on the water issues that they think are important. Our plan is to work with communities over 18 to 24 months, depending on our resourcing and their energy. And what we're doing with those communities is that we're providing resources, and that could be money, but it could also be student time or staff time. We're trying to link community action to more technical expertise. So in one of the case studies, we've drawn very heavily on hydrology and water quality people. That's not my area of expertise, but there are experts that we can link into those programs. We're documenting what people are doing, what communities' actions are taking, and offering research support as is useful. Theoretically, what we're interested in and our work is being informed by is complexity theory and community development. So community development, as I mentioned before, is something I've been teaching and writing about for a long time. Complexity theory, as many of you probably know, comes from the sciences, from the hard sciences rather than the social sciences. So we're experimenting with how the ideas of complexity theory might be relevant to community development. And we think that they are highly relevant because they help us to understand that communities are dynamic and that we need to understand the very specific contexts of communities in order to be helpful around supporting change. We need to provide time and space for ideas to emerge. So this is this idea of bottom-up processes rather than, okay, we've got your solution, we're going to impose a program on your community that will fix whatever problem we think you've got. So emergent ideas coming from communities, and Julie's going to talk later about an emergent idea in Berri, which is really exciting and that would never have been designed external to that community. Just wouldn't have been possible. What complexity also talks to us about, reminds us about the importance of feedback loops. So we are trying to be very careful about our language and encourage other people to be careful about their language because it's very easy for communities to be positioned as powerless or as victims, and we're not, that is not a useful feedback loop at all when communities are facing such big changes. The other idea that we've seen a lot in terms of complexity theory in our work is that small changes can have large and sometimes really unexpected impacts, and that's very exciting to see positive change come from a very small act. In terms of community development, you'll see on this image that what we're trying to do is integrate the community development theories around the dimensions that we see in communities that support community action. So we've got decision-making, resources, networks, information, self-organising and inclusion and communication. So they're the kind of dimensions that we see enable communities to act, and that combined with complexity thinking really encourages us to experiment. So rather than, again, knowing the answers or knowing even the problems, we're actually waiting for those to be jointly identified and responded to. How are we going for time? Okay, I'll just do one more minute and then I'll hand it over to you, Kelsey. So the sorts of things that we're seeing already we've been in the field probably about 12 months now. The things that we're seeing that are changing in communities is that there's in some of the case studies, there's a much stronger water literacy, so that people understand water governance systems, which are very complex in Australia, and I'm sure are complex in other countries as well. But they also are much more able to assess the health of the environment and the water and the waterways that they live by. We've seen new relationships between individuals and groups that lead to action, and this is community development theory. Ideally, we're not important in this process. When we're gone, the things that we've been able to support will still be there, and will actually have will give birth to new ideas, new approaches, new projects way beyond after we're gone. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to lay these deep roots that strengthen community capacities to respond to future challenges. We're building connections between individuals and institutions in this work, trying to enhance localised policy advocacy, helping communities actually articulate why waterways are important to them. What does a waterway mean to them? And finally, one of the things that we're experimenting with this Water Futures program is the strategic use of money and people to support community action. So what would it look like? What kind of funding arrangement would actually be supportive? We see lots of money go to communities, sometimes not very helpfully. And so we're kind of trying to, in this research, explore what would helpful money look like and what would helpful staff look like. So I'll be interested to hear from Julie a bit later with how we're going on that test. So that's me. Now over to you, Kelsey, to talk about the case studies in more detail.
Okay, thank you, Margot. That's provided really good grounding to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of this, and I guess an explanation of the action research methodology. And I guess what I really want to illustrate in going through each of the action research projects that we have going on in Water Futures is what it really looks like on the ground, because I think a lot of the time you hear about community-led change. And for me, I know when I started this research early last year, I just had no idea what that looked like. So it's been a big learning for me, and I think that's something that I want to be able to communicate, because it's not straightforward. It can be really quite messy. You can not know which direction you're heading in, but it's, I guess, this trust that it's a process that's really important to the community to develop a project that's meaningful for them and sustainable for them. So, so the first one I'll talk about is Cabarita Community, and it's probably the one I've been most closely working with, I guess, because I'm based in Mildura, which is right next to Cabarita. So Cabarita is a small community in regional Victoria, which it sits on the lands of the First Peoples of the Millewa Mallee. It's within a key agricultural region that has a mix of dryland farming as well as irrigated horticulture, and borders, like I said, Mildura, which is the site of Australia's first irrigation colony. In 2018, to give you an idea of how much, I guess, irrigation there is around. There was 41,000 hectares of irrigation in the Mallee. So it's pretty fair to say it's an economy that's historically dependent on irrigation, which has meant at times, as well as a consequence, that there has been a lack of consideration for the environmental impact of development. And I think we're definitely at a stage where that's starting to catch up with us. So in this context, where the action research is taking place, we're working alongside a local land care group that sits on the shores of Lake Hawthorne, called Cabarita Community Inc. Lake Hawthorne is very much at the centre of their work and was a key part of their, I guess, organisation as a group. The lake was a once natural floodplain ephemeral lake of the Murray River, which has been transformed over time into a permanent saline wetland, which is, I guess, a consequence of the levee banks and the water regulating structures that have inhibited the occurrence of what were once natural water flows. This transformation into a saline wetland has very much come about through the categorisation of Lake Hawthorne as a service provided to development. And this was first to agriculture, where it acted as a drainage basin for irrigation runoff. And then in its current iteration, it's given the name of an urban stormwater runoff disposal site, which you'll notice sounds very different to the word lake. So the problem, I guess, that the community is really focusing on is advocating for the lake and regeneration of its ailing health. So the lake absorbing all these kind of inputs over time has had a really significant impact on the water quality and as well the ecology, the life around it, the life within it that it can support. And what the community group is navigating is an incredibly complex ownership and management structure. There's a catchment management authority which manages environmental water flows into the lake. There's 2 water regulators. One manages the land as an asset and horticultural drainage into the lake, and another manages some other part of the land, water outfalls and associated salt interception schemes. The Rural City Council relies on the lake for its urban stormwater drainage needs, and there's also a kind of complicating factor that's quite unique to the context where the Department of Education has a land leasing scheme that raises money for local schools, but a legacy issue of that is they've been allocated blocks of land that sit on the lake bed, and so they're trying to make money off of land that's pretty hard to lease out. So the work that we've been doing to date, so I've been working with this community group since the start of the year to explore together, I guess, what it takes for a grassroots community group to be a part of determining their own water future. And this very much has, I guess, an advocacy lens to it. Like I said before I share some of the learnings from the process, I really want to make the point about the importance of investing in relationships in these contexts, through conversations, through curiosity, through being generous with your time, and how this is so important to fostering a powerful kind of knowledge building. And for me, what that has looked like has been attending committee meetings as well as taking the minutes for committee meetings regularly, being involved in event planning for a community festival that the group held in June, which you can see some photos of on your screen. It's involved planting trees and installing irrigation and roping friends into that process with me, having many cups of teas and just offering a hand to the group whenever I can. So you may not necessarily consider this as research in the traditional sense, but it's all very much a part of the relationship building, and it's been such a lesson for me in ensuring that the research is not extractive, but instead is reciprocal. And the lessons and data that's generated from this is really quite rich. And so for this project, one of the most significant learnings in my eyes has been to see the difficulties that communities face in navigating the complexities of water governance agencies who effectively hold the decision-making power over the places that communities care about. The institutional structures create so many barriers, all of which require time and patience for the community to grapple with. But this group has continued to show up to advocate for what is important to them for over 15 years now. And the knowledge that they have about the area is really astounding. And I guess my hope for this research project in particular is not only that we're able to demonstrate how difficult it is for communities to engage with water governance systems and to have impact in that space as well, but also that we're able to convince others of the importance of really listening and really engaging with community knowledge, and hopefully we see this unfold in the local action research context. Okay, so the next one in your screen is in Wilcannia, and this is, I think what's really interesting as I go through each of these sites is how different the projects are, and we entered each of the communities with the idea to come up with a project somewhat related to water, and see what that evolved to in each context. So in Wilcannia, to give those of you that don't know Wilcannia context, it's a town of around 700 residents that's along the lower Darling River, where the quality of the water that runs along the river is essentially undrinkable. That it has times of low or no flow, and often forces the town to switch to bore water, as well as having really dated water treatment facilities that, it makes the water coming from the taps undrinkable on occasion. Wilcannia is a context where some of the failings of the management of the Murray-Darling Basin are really stark. So there's been years and years without regular flows at some points. The river water is not safe to consume and sometimes not even safe to swim in. And more recently, the community endured a really, a consultation process led by the New South Wales government for the design of a replacement weir, which they desperately need for water security ongoing, only for the design that the community agreed upon to be swapped out for a design that had not been consulted on with them at the last moment. So there's understandably a lot of mistrust within this community in particular for government processes and management of the river. And I guess some more context again, Wilcannia is on the lands of the Barkindji peoples, which translates to the people of the river. So the Barkindji have been custodians of this land and living along this part of the river for at least 40,000 years. And for them, you often hear the phrase "water is life." It's very much a part of their culture, and custodianship, with the over-extraction of water from the Darling River and the Murray-Darling Basin, more generally having massive impacts on all parts of the Barkindji people's lives. So I think it's really important to know this context. It's an important frame to understand, one, the enduring connection the Barkindji peoples have to the river and have managed to maintain, which is astounding in the circumstances, and how they continue to think long-term by building this action research project, which I'm about to tell you more about, which fosters custodianship in the younger generations. Okay, so what is the project, you're probably wondering, and how did it come about? We had some early conversations in Wilcannia, which led us to connect to one of the central school teachers who has a class of students ranging from years 3 to 6. I can't think of what age that is now, like 8 to 11. And a Barkindji First Nations elder connected the dots between education of the younger generations, the serious problem that carp pose to the river systems as an introduced pest, and the need for kind of economic feasibility and sustainability longer term. And so this essentially culminated in a carp fertilizer making project with students from Wilcannia Central. It shares, I guess, some similarities with citizen science projects. It's about empowering the younger generation to conduct their own water testing and seeks answers on that which threatens the health of the river. And I guess the really unique aspect of this project, although it's early days, is how it's braiding community empowerment with First Nations values around custodianship for the river. And I think it will be something where the flow-on effects we won't likely see in the life of this project, but we'll continue to see for years into the future. And so some of the work to date has looked like bringing a University of Sydney multidisciplinary team into the space. So we've got, I guess, knowledge holders in soil, hydrology and community development. We've had 3 visits to Wilcannia, which has involved teaching the kids methods of testing water quality, where they found really worrying levels of phosphorus, learning about the impact of carp on the river's health. And I guess, a particularly special moment was on the second visit there, the kids had made a video called Wake Up Wilcannia where they presented everything that they'd learned from the first visit, and it was really cool to see how quick the learning happens. We spent some time fishing with the kids and the teachers before we blended up a carp, which you'll see in the top right. It's a weird jump, but you'll see the blended carp in the top right of your screen, which we use the next day to show the kids the process of making carp fertilizer, which is an interesting and smelly process. I know that this sounds like a lot of fun, and it very much was, but there's also been some really significant learnings along the way, and I think the most significant for me has been that action research is part of a longer game. As I said earlier, we may not see the rippled results of this project in fostering custodianship in the younger generations for decades to come, but the project is very much working on, I guess, laying deep roots within communities and strengthening capacity to respond to future challenges. And I think this approach is particularly aligned in a context where, I guess, disempowerment is a word to use, not to use lightly, but the community has been disempowered in many ways by the systems that govern water in the Murray-Darling Basin. So it's really phenomenal to see that there remains a deep desire to effect change through educations of the generations that are the future in that community. Okay, on to the next one, which will be our talking point. Sorry, I'm aware I'm just talking at you guys a lot, but I guess that's the nature of presentations. So on your screen, you've got the Revive and Thrive Collective, which, I'll dive into what that's all about. So this project is taking place in Berri, which is a town in South Australia, and it's really strongly connected to the Murray River. Horticulture and viticulture are quite dominant in the region, and it sits within the lands of the First Peoples of the River Murray and Mallee regions. So the population in Berri is around 10,800 people. I think Julie might have more up-to-date stats on that, of which 8% of the population are identified as needing assistance with core activities, and a further 10% of the community provides unpaid care to a loved one or friend who requires assistance. So this may seem like kind of random information, but when I start to explain the why, it will start to make a bit more sense. So this action research project has led to the establishment of a collective, which, I guess hasn't happened in the other context so much. It's a group of local organisations that go by the name of Revive and Thrive, and the mission is threefold. So first is to create meaningful training and future employment opportunities for people with disability, which takes stock of, the high percentage of people that are requiring assistance with core activities in the area. The second is to reduce landfill by creating more options for people to donate their secondhand items to be repaired, upcycled and resold within community. And the last is to generate an inclusive community that's less reliant on water for economic activity and stimulation. So the idea of creating a circular economy for secondhand furniture in the region has been one that's been floating around in the minds of community members for a while, and I'll let Julie talk about that soon. With the collection of factors, I guess, finally coming together in the inception of this action research project, where there was some seed funding available, the will of people wanting to be involved, and people really, I guess, coming together to kick things off. And so though you may be wondering what furniture recycling and creating meaningful training and employment opportunities for people with disability has to do with water, it's really around, there's a few things. Firstly, it has the potential impact. It's the potential impact of the project where water comes into play. So when you consider that creating a local circular economy for pre-loved furniture reduces demand for new items, thereby reducing the demand for newly harvested wood, for the production of fabrics and metals, etc., it kind of becomes more clear the significant flow-on effects this can have when it comes to water consumption. But the other significant part is the possibility of generating economic activity in the area that's not reliant on water. So if Berri is facing a future of water scarcity, then it will not, I guess, hopefully not impact the ability of the enterprise to continue running. So this project is also pretty early days. We're about 6 months in at this point and have been running pretty well, in my opinion. We did our first community pop-up event the other day at a cafe run by one of our collective members, which provides employment for people with disability. And the pop-up was aimed at communicating the concept of the initiative in the early stages of planning to the local community, but also to get a sense of buy-in and to open the idea up to suggestions and feedback from the community at an early phase of development. So yeah, it was a really great day. There's some pictures on your screen of the pop-up. There was really significant interest, which was a great outcome in the initiative. So lots of people volunteering or wanting to volunteer to get it up and running, and lots of interest from people with disability to have greater opportunity for different types of training and employment in the region. Some of the learnings from the project, I guess we'll get into discussing in a second when I pass back over to Margot. But for me, it's really been awesome to work with community development practitioners on the ground, people like Julie. It's been a real masterclass in how communities build connections between institutions, between individuals and places, and how groups of people can mobilise the community assets that might be unused for the moment, just sitting there kind of dormant. As well, from the action research perspective, it's been really interesting to follow along with the incremental learning to see how many steps are involved in creating a social enterprise. There's many, which I had no idea about, and I still am learning. But yeah, how many steps are involved and how it's really that approach of like, what is it, eating the elephant one bite at a time or something like that. A phrase I butchered. But yeah, that's our 3 projects. I'm mindful that I'm talking and I'm sick of my own voice, so I'm just going to hand back over to Margot now.
Thanks, Kelsey. I've been picking up some applause and various love hearts and all sorts of things coming up through the system. So I think people have enjoyed hearing that level of detail about the project. So thank you for that. There is a question in the chat that I'll come back to, Julie, because it's probably you that's best to respond to, because it's a question about community support for a particular change. So over to you now, Julie. The question that I'm interested in hearing from you, to start the conversation is, what's your learning so far in terms of your involvement with Revive and Thrive?
I think probably one of the significant things is that when you bring people together around a table, that's where the energy really starts to move. We were surprised how quickly people wanted to come together about an idea, which, as you said, has been fermenting for some time in the community. But when you bring people together, and particularly when we've framed it as it's okay not to know, like we're here with quite an open-ended idea, getting different people to the table, I think that's been great learnings to see what different people bring to the table. So we've got people working in community development, a volunteer with a background in disability. We have somebody from RDA, we have somebody who has a business, and most recently our mayor leaning in to want to be part of this. So I think what has really surprised me is how much hope there is and how much energy there is to create new possibilities for our community. I think what I've also learned recently is how people need time. As Kelsey mentioned, we need time to be able to what I call play in the grey. Community change is a large, complex piece of work, and to make sure that you honour all the different voices. We've been doing some talking about whose voices are at the table, who else do we need to include. I think regardless of what community issue you're working on, we perhaps underestimate how complex it is and how it does take time to build relationships, to make sure you've got the right voices, and to be okay with not quite knowing where this is going. And I must admit, when I first got involved, where I thought it was going and where it's going now are 2 really different places. So that's something I've learned is be brave, take time, and be prepared to test and learn, have a go at different ways, listen deeply to those around you, because the power and the knowledge is there in the community.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I think that kind of leads in a little bit to, well, one of the other questions that I had for you, which was, what do you think funders and government policy, there's a lot of government policy and a lot of government money around to try and support communities adapt to a changing climate. What advice would you give them from your experience, not only in this project, but your longer experience of working with communities?
Absolutely, there's money that flows into our community, but we are constantly astounded by what it's used for, how it's used, how it shows up in our community. We see lots and lots of random acts of improvement money coming in. People have a great idea. We see a lot of duplication. People, multiple people even at the same time researching different things or coming along with their surveys or telling us what we need. I think the most important thing for funders is we would ask them to show up as stewards rather than gatekeepers, to show up in a way that they want to work with us, that they want to honour the knowledge that's there, that they start with the local people. Funding should be flexible. It should have trust in the local people. Funders, whether they be government, policymakers, whatever level, or philanthropic, need to build trust and build relationships with people in communities and show respect for the knowledge that's already there, because there is so much. We're swimming with data about our community, but still people are making decisions about our community that we're not part of and that doesn't honour the knowledge that we've already got.
Yeah.
We're very fortunate in our town to work in a philanthropy space where we've been able to co-design the expectations and the agreements around funding. And I would think that we would like to see more of that, so that the other thing I would say is funding what it takes. A lot of funding flows in for programs, but people don't realise that in communities you actually need people to do things. Yeah. So that unrestricted funding, and that's one of the benefits in working in this project with you at the moment, is that the funding does a lot of caveats around it. And it's interesting, when you trust people with that, I think they're more responsible than when there are more rules and regulations, because we feel like it's a real privilege and we're being really careful about how we use it.
Yeah, that's so interesting, isn't it? That you actually get increased accountability by having less accountability burden.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, that's the same in this project and also other work we're doing in our town where there's a lot of trust. We've built some really strong trusting relationships. And I think we're really, really careful about what we're doing, because we do really respect that trust and we feel very responsible to make good decisions. And we feel it's community owned. People in our group will actually say, well, this is actually community money. How are we going to check out with community that we're on the right track? So yeah, I think funders that are prepared to show up authentically, build relationships, and allow community to make decisions about the best use of that funding, will see much more bang for their buck than those that are more prescriptive. One of the other things that I think is about the acquittal or the measurement evaluation processes expected with funding. I think communities would prefer to focus on learning, which is certainly what we're able to do in this work with project in particular. It's not about the numbers and that kind of thing. It's more about what are we learning, what's the distance we're travelling, how are we building capability with our people? Because at the end of the day, that's the things that's going to make the difference. We are a water insecure community. We need to be able to measure, evaluate and learn in a way that's an ongoing thing, not just we've met those numbers, tick that box, that's the end of that funding. It's going to be, okay, what have we learned from this? What might we need to do differently next time? So that work around measurement, evaluation and learning and how that funding is measured, I think is really important.
Yeah, that's a great segue to the question about how on this webinar, I'm guessing that we've got quite a lot of people who are in research type roles, similar to myself. How can we be useful for communities such as yours in Berri in terms of actually contributing to the changes that you want to make?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's huge lots of ways that it can be useful. Supporting and encouraging communities, walking alongside them, which is certainly what we're doing here with Kelsey. Helping us to understand perhaps work in other places, things we can tap into, what we can learn, new and different ways to evaluate, which I think helps us with our confidence, because if you have a go at something, it's us, a researcher, can be very useful around, let us capture some of those things for you and then use some processes to help you reflect on that, to take some of your next steps. I think you can prepare resources for us for either things for our learning where we're at, but also help us to capture our story and make our own resources that then we can use to advocate for policy change, for more funding. I think case studies are just fantastic. Our town, Berri, has a relationship with Clear Horizon, who we have some evaluative people working alongside of us for 10 years. And they come up and show up in our community. It's not, here's a survey, send out to your community. But, we had a professor for a whole week doing really authentic talking with people in the community, sitting in coffee shops, that kind of thing, really capturing the community story of, has there been changes as a result of our work? What changes are we seeing, and how do we capture that and put that into some sort of documents that then we can then advocate for ourselves and say, hey, look, this is working in our community, so go with us in this way of working, or go with us by providing funding for us. So I think that's where the research can be really useful to really help us capture that story, but also empower us and help us build our capability to do more of this.
Yep. One of the things that I think research is able to do, and we've tried to do, and I'm not necessarily saying this about Berri, particularly Julie, but being able to document dead ends, where not just where everything always goes well, but what can we learn from when things don't go well? I think that that's a really valuable contribution that researchers can, if they're brave enough, because particularly if they're in a commissioned research relationship, it's very hard to say, well, no, I think that worked very well, and what can we learn there? But that would be a challenge that I would issue to other researchers, is not only looking at things that are working well, but also looking at things that have been tested and tried, but then pivoted away from because it doesn't suit where the community needs to go. Now, there's quite a few questions in the Q&A that have come through, but there's one in particular that maybe it's for both you, Kelsey, and Julie, about the Almond Board of Australia and Victoria Farmers Fed have called for moratoriums about new horticulture developments in the Lower Murray and Mallee area. Do either of you know whether there are community groups supporting these types of calls? So I think this is about slowing down the expansion of almond in that region.
Yeah, I guess it's so nuanced, and it always is in communities, and I guess that's part of the message of what we're seeing today. Like, communities are so complex. You're working in a space where a lot of the people that you might be working alongside have an almond orchard or like a pistachio orchard or citrus, and it is I guess a big part of the economies through historical development. It's the nature of that. So I am sure there are people in community that would support those calls, and I'm sure there are people in the community that wouldn't. So I don't know that I can answer that with the and I'm sure there's people that sit somewhere in between where they can really see that horticulture provides something for the region and contributes to people's livelihoods, and also can have really detrimental environmental impacts in some ways as well. So it's such a nuanced conversation. I don't know if I could give a yes or no.
Julie, do you have a sense of what people are talking about, Berri?
Yeah, I think exactly what Kelsey said. I think there's some quite polarised views. I think it's really complex in the community because people are invested for different reasons. I think overall, as Riverlanders, we want the economy to do well, and people do understand and are concerned from a wellbeing point of view about what it means for primary producers, and we are invested in having primary production. But how we balance that out with our environmental needs is a real a real challenge for us. We've got additional challenges of the majority in the area where I live are very small properties. A number of those people actually want to get off their properties because they're no longer viable with the price of grapes. So that whether I can get water or not has become less important as to, what's my future, what off-farm income can I find to keep going. So where those small holdings might have been as to sustain families in the past, they can't because of the low prices, commodity prices, and yet they can't necessarily sell the property to solve that. And also we have a lot of people that are living on those properties. That's their home as well. And then we've got, housing, lack of housing. So if you sell that property, move off that property because you've now got off farm income, what does that mean? So I think there's layers and layers to it. Yeah.
I hope that that's one thing that we can actually contribute through this focus on community level knowledge is a much more nuanced understanding that there isn't a simple answer here. There's no magic, silver bullet that's going to be useful for everyone across the basin. There has to be a level of dialogue and negotiation, and there may be people are going to face changes that are going to be uncomfortable. But communities change. They I absolutely believe in the capacity of communities to reinvent themselves, and that in some ways what's happening in Berri. Okay, so leave that one. Someone's asked us how we're defining transformative change. We'll tell you when we've defined it. It's a big question, and it's kind of an evolving question, I suppose. It's the answer to that question will evolve. There's a question about disability services in the Riverland. Now, how do you link? So, Julie, do you want to mention anything about the networks of people involved there?
Yeah, so what's happening is other organisations that work with people with disabilities are leaning in to see what we're doing. It was interesting the day of the community shout out. I noticed that one of the classes of special options students came up to. We hadn't specifically invited them, so they must have just heard it was on. It's great to see those young people being involved in the action research and having a say about things that interested them for potential training and employment. So we aren't specifically going out to them, but they're coming in anyway. The Thrive Cafe that already runs, a lot of the participants come in on a Thursday for their coffee and they catch up. And so this is something that's going to grow from that. But yes, most definitely we want to make sure we're tapping into the voice. And it's about those people that live with disabilities ultimately making the decisions about what kinds of employment or training that they want to engage with and how they want that to look, which is part of what this research is about. But yeah, it is interesting that for a long time this idea was on the cards. Like as Kelsey said, we have a large, 10%, which is higher than state average of people living with disability in our community, because we have a special school and special option classes based in our community that come from the region. So people move to our community because of those great services that we have for young people. And while it's been talked about for a long time, and nobody has ever been connecting the dots to go, how do we get something happening here? Lots of agencies and things, we should have this, we should have that. So this has become a bit of a spark, that's what I would call it, get some thinking going. And now people are leaning in and going, you know what, we really do need to get around something like this. So yeah, the connections are happening organically. That's what I'll say.
Yeah. And the other connection that I really love that your group has made is with other social enterprises with people with disabilities in other regions. One of the really powerful things that we see in our research is communities learning from other communities. Kind of researchers and policy people getting out of the way and having those, creating those direct conversations between communities who are trying to act in similar ways. Sorry, my attention is going back to the
Question. Yeah.
Q&A. There's a question from about web-based dissemination of our findings. The final year of our project will focus on how do we take the learnings from these 4 sites and translate them in ways that will be useful to other communities facing similar challenges. So if there's a small school on a river system who have kids who are interested in water quality, what could they learn from our Wilcannia case study? If there's another community that's having a water scarce future, what could they learn from Berri? So absolutely, we will be trying to use web-based processes to disseminate that knowledge. But that's the next big challenge for our project is translating very localized and very contextualized knowledge into resources or products that are useful for other communities. So, and the process that we'll go through there is a collaborative one where we will talk to communities about, well, what would make sense for you? Would it be a webinar like this? Would it be a one-pager, things to avoid if you're setting up a social enterprise? We don't know what it will look like. So, yes, we'll be trying to do that. There's a question about, this one's for you, I think, Kelsey, about do you consider action research has a distinctive role to play in reduce or work effectively with conflict related to water in the local community?
I think it's one of many approaches, I guess. And you do read of action research being at a really large scale. And maybe that's a potential, but I have no expertise in that whatsoever. But I think at the local level, and this makes me specifically think of the Cabarita action research project. Yeah, I think so, because it's all about bringing together the knowledges that exist within community and finding a way forward that works for that community. And I think the beauty of that it's really contextual. I think that's what action research allows is time for relationship building, time for really getting to know the historical context of the place and why the conflict is at the stage that it's at or the state that it's in. What are the nuances in that particular community that you need to work with and work alongside? So I think it's one of many approaches. It just happens to, I don't have any expertise in any other approaches, so I can't say. We might be. Is it time up? No?
Yeah. Oh, we are. Sorry, everyone.
I was just going to jump in and say, I wish we had another half hour or hour, because I'm sure we could continue answering the many great questions coming in and discussing the very interesting topics. So, yes, thank you for those that joined. Thank you for those that are still here, even though we've gone over time. Not great sharing by me, but that's okay. I think such important material to discuss and interesting material. So there will be, I think as I mentioned at the beginning, a recording link that will be emailed to all of you who signed up for the webinar and will be available from the AWS website. You'll also receive as an attendee a certificate of attendance within the next couple of business days, which you can use for CPD points. There will also be in a second a short 1 minute survey, which I really encourage you to complete, or you can scan the QR code on the right of the screen there. And there will be another webinar in our series, the next one due on the 5th of November, and the details of that will be coming very, very soon. We're just finalising the topic for that right now. So you'll hear very soon about the next webinar on the 5th of November. So again, thank you all for joining, and I hope to see you again next time in about a month.